take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Friday, January 22nd, 2021, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. And best of all, it's got to be my first show of the Biden administration. We survived it. 4 years. We made it. We have escaped the Trump era, at least all of us except about 400,000 who died of COVID. But otherwise, we made our way out and are seeing a new day in our democracy. We're going to be talking a lot about the future of marijuana politics under the Biden administration and the 50-50 Democratic Senate on today's show. Coming up first, we'll have our Cannabis Headline News Week, our new segment where we give you the biggest cannabis stories of the entire week, coming up right after this introductory segment. Then we'll go right into the Radical Rant because I got some real inspiration this week from a state senator here in my home state of Idaho, C. Scott Grow. Grow, Scott, grow. C. Scott Grow has proposed a constitutional amendment. He wants to amend the Idaho Constitution to forever ban marijuana legalization. Forever and ever, amen. We'll talk a little bit about that. Also coming up in this first hour of the show, we're going to take a look at the state of Maine and the issue of cannabis advertising and enticement to children. I have a little personal experience with this as well up in Sumter, Oregon. We'll talk about that. Plus, speaking of legal marijuana sales, they started today in the state of Oregon. I'm going to tell you about that and why it's notable for being not notable. Kind of interesting how it went down in Arizona, plus how they learned a lot from what we did in the state of Oregon. And then in hour 2, Toker Talk Radio, it's going to be pretty much a cannabis science roundup. So stay tuned for that. We got a study on cannabis and COVID, a study on cannabis and opioids, one on gonorrhea. Cannabis could affect gonorrhea, people. Is there anything you can't do, cannabis? Also, a look at cannabis and self-harm among teenagers with mental problems. We'll talk about that. And a study about cannabis and helping alcoholics who are trying to quit drinking. And as we get toward the end of the show, we're going to go and stray a little bit off the cannabis path and just get into general Democratic politics because I got a little mini rant. Just a tiny one, a mini rant on Joe Biden and the Democrats, their promises of a $2,000 check. I'm still waiting to see my $2,000 check. Where's my $2,000 check? But all that's coming up pretty soon here. But also, I did want to give credit where credit is due. I mentioned we survived the 4 years of the Trump administration. And those of you who've been listening to me for any length of time know that I find him to be not just the worst president of the United States, but like the worst American, like ever. Like everything that's bad about America rolled up into one human being, that's Donald Trump. And so if you know how much I despise Donald Trump, you'll also see how shocking it is that today I've got to give him credit for doing something good. Yes, I know, crazy, isn't it? But on his way out the door, Donald Trump did a whole bunch of pardons and commutations. Now, presidents always do this when they're, leaving. They give out pardons and commutations to various people who they feel have suffered an unjust sentence. A lot of times it's for their own political cronies, and no more so than Donald Trump pardoning people like Michael Flynn. But in his last acts as president of the United States, Donald Trump issued these pardons and commutations that included 12 people who were serving time for marijuana convictions. Those 12 people are Lynn Barney, Jonathan Braun, Brian Simmons, Farrell Damon Scott, John Knock, Anthony DeJohn, Corvain Cooper, Wei Kuo Long, Michael Pelletier, Craig Cecil, James Romans, and Noah Kleinman, all released. 6 of those people, Knock, Scott, DeJohn, Cooper, Cecil, and Romans, were serving life sentences. And a 7th person, Long, he was age 58, was serving 25 more years. I'm glad they're out. This is your Cannabis Headline News, brought to you every weekday by Radical Russ Radio at radicalruss.com, your 24-hour source for marijuana music and cannabis conversations. Subscribe today for just $4.20 at patreon.com/radicalruss. With your Cannabis Headline News for the week ending Friday, January 22nd, 2021, I'm Russ Belville. In his last acts as President of the United States, Donald Trump issued pardons and commutations that include 12 people serving time for marijuana convictions. Lynn Barney, Jonathan Braun, Brian Simmons, Farrell Damon Scott, John Knock, Anthony DeJohn, Corvain Cooper, Wei Kuo Long, Michael Pelletier, Craig Cecil, James Romans, and Noah Kleiman have all been freed. Half of the dozen freed, Knock, Scott, DeJohn, Cooper, Cecil, and Romans, were serving life sentences, and Long, at age 58, was still facing over 25 more years imprisonment. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo on Tuesday previewed expected revenue from a legal marijuana program he's been proposing through his annual budget, reports Marijuana Moment.
We also propose legalizing adult use cannabis, which would raise about $350 million. $100 million would go to a social equity fund. That would still give us $250 million towards the budget and our needs.
In addition to state and local sales taxes and a 10.25% retail tax, Cuomo's legalization plan would be the first in the nation to set a wholesale tax indexed to THC potency. According to the governor's briefing book, quote, cannabis flower, pre-roll, and shake products are taxed at a rate of 0.7 cents per milligram of THC content. Cannabis concentrates and oil products are taxed at a rate of 1 cent per milligram of THC content, while cannabis-infused edible products are taxed at a rate of 4 cents per milligram of THC content, end quote. Nevada Governor Steve Sisolak on Tuesday said that his budget proposal contains provisions to keep marijuana tax revenue flowing to schools in the state.
My budget also ensures marijuana tax dollars will continue to fund education to ensure districts can meet the needs of students during the pandemic and beyond.
Marijuana Moment reports that for fiscal year 2021, Nevada had already taken in more than $36 million in cannabis tax revenue as of September. Sisolak has also committed to promoting equity and justice in the state's marijuana law. Last year, for example, he pardoned more than 15,000 people who were convicted for low-level cannabis possession. That action was made possible under a resolution the governor introduced that was unanimously approved by the state's Board of Pardons Commissioners. Governor Ned Lamont is positioning lawmakers for a robust debate this year on legalizing and taxing the sale of marijuana for recreational use in the state of Connecticut. The administration has begun seeking agency feedback on a draft bill that would tax dry cannabis flowers at $1.25 per gram, trimmed marijuana plants at 50 cents per gram, and wet cannabis at 28 cents per gram. In addition to applying the standard sales tax of 6.35% to marijuana transactions, a 3% surcharge would be added and the revenue from this shared with municipalities. The bill would also automatically erase convictions for possession of less than 4 ounces of cannabis that occurred prior to October 1st, 2015, and allow those convicted of this offense after that date to petition the state for erasure. It also limits marketing so children are not targeted for cannabis sales, increases trained drug recognition experts in the state and municipal police departments, and updates Connecticut's Clean Air Act to incorporate cannabis and vaping within existing restrictions on secondhand smoke. North Dakota lawmakers have introduced a bill to significantly expand marijuana decriminalization in the state. The legislation, which was filed Monday, would build on an initial cannabis decriminalization law that was enacted in 2019. Under the current statute, possession of a half ounce or less of marijuana is an infraction, punishable by a fine of up to $1,000 with no jail time. The new proposal would make possession of up to an ounce a non-criminal offense that carries just a $50 fine. Furthermore, possession of more than 1 ounce and less than 250 grams, or a little less than 9 ounces, would be treated as an infraction rather than a Class B misdemeanor as it is currently classified. Possessing more than 250 grams of marijuana would be a Class B misdemeanor, and possessing more than 500 grams would be a Class A misdemeanor. A North Dakota Republican says that despite his opposition to marijuana legalization, quote, we have to address the issue, end quote, and has filed a marijuana legalization bill. Representative Jason Doctor wants lawmakers to draft the language of the law rather than out-of-state interest groups that pour money into a ballot measure campaign. Under Doctor's newly proposed House Bill 1420, Anyone 21 and older can use, possess, and transport up to 1 ounce of marijuana or an equivalent amount of edible marijuana products. Licensed dispensaries can sell anyone over 21 up to 1 ounce of marijuana, and marijuana products must be sold in opaque, child-resistant packaging. Doctor's bill has attracted co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle. Voters in South Dakota became the first in the nation last year to approve both medical and adult use marijuana on the same ballot. Those wins mean the sale, possession, cultivation, and use of marijuana will become legal for all adults 21 and over as of July 1st, 2021. But lawmakers are slow to file any bills to regulate that market, with only one bill filed so far in the 2021 session. A group of 15 Republican lawmakers have formed what they call a cannabis caucus to address marijuana issues this session. One high-ranking Senate leader said enacting a regulatory framework for marijuana will probably require more than one session of work and will likely spill into the 2022 session or require a special session to complete. That won't stop legalization from going into effect, however. It just means adults in South Dakota will get their processed marijuana and cannabis plants from illicit sources. Also, since Amendment A only allows adults to cultivate cannabis at home if there are no licensed stores in their jurisdiction, the legislature's delay will effectively grant all adults the right to home grow starting in July. Two Florida Democrats, State Senator Tina Polsky and Representative Nick Duran, are bringing back legislation to stop public employers from firing workers who use medical marijuana. In 2016, Florida voters approved an amendment legalizing marijuana for medical use. In the 2019 session, the legislature approved a bill allowing the sale of a smokable form of medical marijuana. However, many employees are still required to undergo drug tests, and under current law, a positive test can result in an individual being fired. The measures from Polsky and Duran state, quote, an employer may not take adverse personnel action against an employee or job applicant who is a qualified patient using medical marijuana, end quote. Those bills, however, will only protect employees in the public sector. Private employers will still be able to drug test and fire medical marijuana patients. The state of Illinois is issuing $31.5 million in grants to 80 organizations throughout the state committed to repairing the damage wrought to communities by the drug war. The funds are part of the state's Restore, Reinvest, and Renew program, which was established under Illinois' adult use cannabis legalization law. It requires 25% of marijuana tax dollars to be put in that fund and used to provide disadvantaged people with services such as legal aid, youth development, community reentry, and financial support. Grant recipients include local governments, faith-based organizations, and businesses, according to Marijuana Moment. The process of selecting grantees involved an analysis of local data on issues like unemployment, gun violence, poverty, and incarceration rates, as well as information sourced from the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Grant distributions vary from about $20,000 to nearly $2 million. Legislative staffer Peter Kleinfelter spoke during a virtual committee hearing in Washington state to introduce a bill to finally allow legal home cannabis cultivation.
The bill would authorize adults age 21 and over to produce up to 6 cannabis plants.
According to Marijuana Moment, House Bill 1019 sets a household maximum of 15 plants and requires the logging of the producer's name, birth date, address, and the harvest date of any plants and containers holding more than 1 ounce. But not everyone will be allowed to grow.
The bill expressly retains the right of property owners to prohibit the cultivation of cannabis by a renter.
Homes used as daycares would also be banned from home growing, which must remain out of public view. In addition, HB 1019 adds a consideration for the smell of cannabis.
It is a Class 3 civil infraction for the production or possession of plants or marijuana to result in marijuana being readily smelled from a public place or the private property of another housing unit.
The American Medical Association and its Mississippi State affiliate are signing on to a lawsuit that seeks to overturn Mississippi's just-passed medical marijuana law on a technicality. Mississippi's medical marijuana law passed with over 70% support in 2 votes last November. Opponents are suing over a state law that declares, quote, signatures of the qualified electors from any congressional district shall not exceed 1/5 of the total number of signatures required to qualify an initiative petition for placement on the ballot, end quote. The problem is that the law was written when Mississippi had 5 districts. The state now has only 4 districts, so naturally the medical marijuana initiative needed at least 25% of its signatures to come from each of the 4 districts. Should the courts rule in favor of the plaintiffs, the people of Mississippi would lose their medical marijuana law and be functionally barred from placing any future initiatives on the ballot. claiming that, quote, mermaids are featured in a number of stories, movies, toys, costumes, and other popular culture items and marketing aimed at young children and teenagers, end quote. Regulators in the state of Maine are fining a South Portland cannabis shop $10,000 for violating rules against marketing aimed at children. According to the rules for the state's newly opened adult use program, packages or labeling depicting humans, animals, or fruit are prohibited, as are packages or labels that would reasonably appear to target or appeal to anyone under the age of 21. A Virginia Senate subcommittee focused on marijuana policy met for the second time on Wednesday, agreeing to a set of amendments to a cannabis legalization bill that are expected to be formally adopted by the full committee on Friday. One of the decisions the subcommittee made was to recommend that an independent agency be responsible for regulating the marijuana program rather than the state's existing alcohol control department, as would be the case under the governor's bill as introduced. That also means that the timeline for sales implementation would have to be pushed back to 2024 instead of 2023 to provide time to stand up a new regulatory body. The panel also narrowly agreed that home cultivation option for adults should remain in the bill, according to Marijuana Moment. In terms of local control, members said they would prefer for municipalities to have to opt out of allowing cannabis businesses in their areas if they didn't want them, instead of being required to proactively opt in, as is written in the current legislation. Marijuana Moment reports that 2 in 3 Texans support legalizing marijuana to boost revenue for K-12 education in the state, according to a new poll. 64% said they're in favor of that proposal, compared to 35% who said they were against it. About half of Republicans and conservatives, 66% of moderates, 71% of independents, and more than 3/4 of Democrats and liberals said they support legalization for increased school funding. Overall, more Texans support funding education by legalizing cannabis than using other revenue options, such as increasing the sales tax, putting a new tax on sugary drinks, or raising taxes on corporations, hotel occupancy, or motor vehicles. The only options that proved more popular than marijuana legalization were allowing casino gambling, increasing tobacco taxes, and enacting a new tax on vaping. Increased consumer demand for cannabis in Oregon helped push wholesale prices in the state out of a 3-year slump caused by overproduction. For the first time since 2017, the median price per pound of recreational marijuana sold by cultivators to retailers topped $1,500 in December, according to data provided by the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. Recreational marijuana sales in the state grew 38% in 2020, ending the year at a record $1 billion. Medical sales added another $109 million to the overall total. The state experienced year-over-year growth in every month of 2020, indicating that the coronavirus pandemic and resulting recession didn't negatively affect overall demand. In fact, the pandemic may have helped sales as consumers turned to cannabis for stress relief. President-elect Joe Biden's pick to lead the Democratic National Committee is a strong backer of marijuana legalization, the latest example of a nominee holding cannabis policy reform views that go further than the incoming president's. If confirmed by party leaders on Thursday, as is expected, former South Carolina Democratic Party Chair Jamie Harrison will be responsible for coordinating Democrats' national political activities. To that end, a push from the chair to emphasize marijuana reform, which is overwhelmingly supported by Democratic voters, could be broadly influential. Harrison made a 2020 run for a Senate seat held by outgoing Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham, but didn't prevail. During his campaign, he stressed the need to legalize marijuana as a means to promote racial justice. Representative Greg Steube, a Republican of Florida, has filed a bill to move marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act, the first marijuana reform submitted to the new Congress. Text of the legislation, which has not yet been posted on Congress's website, but was shared with Marijuana Moment, states that, quote, the Attorney General of the United States shall, by order not later than 60 days after the date of enactment of this section, transfer marijuana from Schedule 1 of such act to Schedule 3 of such act, end quote. While Steube's new bill would not end federal prohibition in the way the MORE Act would, it would protect federal employees who use marijuana. It would allow cannabis companies to deduct business expenses from their taxes, it would make scientific research easier, and it would end threats from the U.S. Postal Service that publishers have faced over the mailing of newspapers containing marijuana advertisements. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for the week ending Friday, January 22nd, 2021. I'm Russ Belville. Cannabis Headline News is heard at the top of every hour on Radical Russ Radio, and Friday's news is contained within the free Russ Belville Show live podcast. For daily downloads of Cannabis Headline News podcasts to your device every morning, subscribe by becoming a patron of Radical Russ Radio. Big thanks to all the patrons out there that are helping to keep us on the air. Your contributions are now paying the bills. We're actually breaking even here on the Russ Belville Show. Great to have you there. Also, we're live on YouTube now. If you haven't checked out the Radical Russ YouTube channel, check it out. We stream live. And that means I got to say hi to lovely Libra, lovely, lively Lisa Libra. And John Thomas is out there. I saw Stone Kidney in the chat room. There's a chat room there at the YouTube. So feel free to join the community. I got to take a good pause here for the good cause. And when we come back, a radical rant about the prohibitionists in Idaho. See Scott grow. Grow, Scott, grow.
Almost busted in Laredo, but for reasons that I'd rather not disclose.
I smoke pot, and I like it a lot. Hi, this is Willie Nelson. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer to use than alcohol. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting responsible marijuana smokers in America. And to learn what you can do to help, please contact NORML at www.norml.org or call toll-free at 888-67-NORMAL.
The show was long and we were just sitting there, and we'd come to play and not just for the ride.
You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
Tough on crime, lock 'em up. But that wasn't the answer.
You can find Radical Russ online everywhere.
Radical Russ here, reminding you that marijuana legalization doesn't just happen. Smart, dedicated activists have put their freedom and future on the line to make it happen. Like the activists at MPP, the Marijuana Policy Project. MPP has coordinated efforts to pass most of the successful medical marijuana and legalization initiatives since the late 1990s. Learn more about the project and donate today at mpp.org. And keep it here on Radical Russ Radio for conversations with leaders from this organization, the best marijuana music, and the latest news about cannabis.
And now, another episode of Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre. I'm your host, Leonard Pinth-Garnell III. Tonight we revel in the hilarity of acquiring cannabis when miscommunication occurs between the cannabis delivery service and the consumer. The Royal Shakespearean Cannabis Theatre Company presents the classic David's Not Present piece, made famous by Richard Merrin and Thomas Chong. Enjoy.
Hark! Who goes there?
It is I, David. Pray grant me immediate passage, good sir. I come bearing a package of great import.
Hark! Who goes there?
It is I, David, as I previously informed you. Make haste in unlatching this portal, for I believe the constable hath cast his visage upon me. I bring you the package you seek.
'Tis David?
Affirmative, my good man. 'Tis David. Now open this door forthwith.
David's not present.
For Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre, I'm Leonard Pinth-Garnell III.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
That marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug.
Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it and didn't inhale.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
Radical Rant.
Today for the Radical Rant, we take you to my home state of Idaho, where we are battling to end adult marijuana prohibition in America's last absolute prohibition state. Like Nebraska, like other states, we're looking at 2022, that ballot for putting an initiative on the ballot before the people. Last year, we went forward with medical marijuana, and that push is still working here in the state of Idaho. Just another group is pushing that, and we are working to bring legalization to the gem state, and it's surrounded. They've got legalization in Washington since 2012, in Oregon since 2014, in Nevada since 2016, and now in Montana, just legalized in 2022. And the legislature of the state of Idaho is terrified by this prospect that they might be like, 15 other states, 1/3 of the U.S. population, and stop locking people up for a plant. And this brings us to this week and a state senator whose name is C. Scott Grow. And I always laugh when I see his name because on our way to our CBD store in Boise, he's a legislator from the city of Eagle, which is kind of a bedroom community for Boise, very kind of upscale. And driving down that main road through Eagle, we would see his giant sign out there for his election for state senate that said, C. Scott Grow. And I'd always say, grow, Scott, grow. It's like the Dick and Jane book, right? But C. Scott Grow was appointed to his position as state senator in 2018. And I haven't gone back to look at why he got that appointment. I wasn't living in Idaho at the time. But then in 2020, he had to run for the seat, and he won the seat because he is a Republican, and this is Idaho. Also turns out that C. Scott Grow is a high-level official, or was a high-level official, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a.k.a. the Mormons. And if you don't know much about the Mormons, do know this, that after Utah, Idaho is one of the most Mormon states in the country. It's like Idaho, Utah, a little bit of Nevada, a little bit of Arizona. In fact, on a per capita basis, maybe even more Mormon. Have to look that up too, but still gives me a little bit of an issue when we have that separation of church and state kind of being erased, appointing leadership from the church into leadership of the government. I don't know if I'm cool with that. But what I know I'm not cool with is torching a state constitution because you don't like how the people might use it. What's happening here in the state of Idaho is that State Senator C. Scott Grow, has introduced a constitutional amendment. Now, Idaho is one of these states where there can be initiatives on the ballot and there can be constitutional amendments on the ballot. But only the legislature can put the constitutional amendments on the ballot. The people can put initiatives, just statutes, and so can the legislature. They can legislatively refer statutes. But no, he's going for the whole ball of wax. He's going for the Constitution. He wants to amend the Constitution. In his own words here, quote, "This legislation will ensure illegal drugs stay illegal." And what he's proposing in the Constitution is to say that all drugs in Idaho Title 3701T, 3702, and 3704, I think I got those numbers right, shall henceforth forever be shall henceforth forever be illegal, never to ever be legalized, ever. No possible way we're ever going to legalize. In the Constitution, people. He wants to put that in the Constitution. Now, a very smart Boise Democrat in the state Senate, named Grant Burgoyne, kind of said, Scott, if you put references to Idaho title numbers in the Constitution, those numbers are going to change, right? Like they have amendments and they have new laws that are inserted, and all the time when you look at laws, they have they're crossing out, DEF and replacing it with EFG because they inserted a new D, right? That happens all the time with deletions and repeals and additions and amendments. So 3701, 3702, and 3704, those currently refer to respectively, marijuana, Schedule 1 drugs, and Schedule 2 drugs. But they might not always. Someday those might be Title 38. Or the numbers might be 3701X instead of T, right? There could be a change. So this Boise attorney points out, you can't put in the Constitution something that refers to Idaho code numbers. Those numbers are going to change. So not only is this desperate Hail Mary attempt to try to stop marijuana legalization, it's also just not very good legislation. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense from a public policy point of view. But they are so terrified we are going to come in and pass marijuana legalization. They can see the handwriting on the wall. They saw, 372701T, 372705, and 372707. Let's get the numbers right, Russ. We've got them right in front of us. Those are the codes. He wants to create a new section of the Idaho Constitution that bans the legalization of any psychoactive drug. So not just marijuana legalization we're talking here. We're also talking, should we come around to seeing the benefit in psilocybin mushrooms? They've already done that in Oregon. Or the benefits of LSD. Or the benefits of all sorts of drugs. Basically what Scott Grow is trying to do here, Senator Grow, is trying to say that as of 2020, Idaho found all the drugs and all the benefits that could ever be used for all these drugs. Science will never change. Medicine will never have a new understanding. Culture won't adopt a new view. Talk about regressive. I mean, there's always been a joke about Idaho. Welcome to Idaho, set your clock back 30 years. This guy wants to make it fact. So retroactive, like we're not going to evolve beyond 2020. 2020 was the peak of medicine, the peak of understanding. We're not going to go any farther than that. So obviously, this is just a desperation Hail Mary attempt to try to stop us. And it's not the first time. It's remarkable what these Idaho politicians are willing to do to thwart marijuana legalization. Now, when this first became on their radar was around 2012, right? Like they fought off the medical marijuana pretty well, right? 96 California passes, 98 it's Oregon and Washington. By 2000 you got Colorado joining, Nevada's joining, Montana. So all the states around them by like 2004, other than Utah and Wyoming, had medical marijuana. So up through the mid-2000s, it's really not, there's no pressure on the Idaho legislature, let's say. But by 2012, when you had Washington and Colorado passing legalization, and now some of the more red states were starting to pass medical marijuana, the Idaho legislature started to get nervous because Idaho still has the petitioning power. There's only 24 states that have it. Idaho's one of the states where you can go and collect signatures and put a law on the ballot for the voters to choose. So in 2013, the Idaho legislature, led by State Senator Chuck Winder, who is now currently the Senate president, he sponsored a non-binding resolution for the state of Idaho to, quote, state its oppositions to efforts to legalize marijuana for any purpose in the state of Idaho, end quote. Any purpose. You can use marijuana for nothing, not medicine, not hemp, not nothing. The Idaho legislature says, no, it'll never change. We hate it. We're never going to stop it. Never going to do it. That was 2013. And it passed with 5 or 6 votes against it, right? Passed in 2013. But then in 2014, Sanjay Gupta comes along, or it was late 2013, I think, August. Sanjay Gupta comes along on CNN, puts Charlotte Figi on TV, this little epileptic girl from Colorado, 6 years old, having hundreds of seizures a day, tells the story of how her parents get her CBD oil and her seizures go to virtually nothing. A miracle cure for this kid. And that changed a lot of minds real quick. By 2014, Idaho's neighbor Utah, people, was the first state to jump on board the CBD bandwagon, passed this law that allows low THC CBD oil. 17 states by the end of 2015 had done the same thing, and not hippy-dippy liberal states. Now, granted, they already had medical marijuana, but we're talking states in the Midwest and the South are passing CBD oil. By 2015, the CBD craze and saving little kids became so politically popular that even the Idaho legislature that just 2 years prior to that had said, hell no, never, we'll never legalize marijuana for any purpose whatsoever. 2 years later, they pass on a bipartisan basis a CBD oil law for little kids, little epileptic kids. Goes through the House, goes through the Senate. And then the governor at the time, Butch Otter, vetoed the CBD bill. The first and only governor in the entire United States out of the 17, 18, 19 states now that have passed it, only one to have looked at seizing little kids, getting a miracle reprieve from their epilepsy, and said, nah, we can't have that. He actually said that, quote, the bill asks us to look past the potential for misuse and abuse with criminal intent. What? We're talking low THC CBD oil for little kids. What's the criminal intent there, right? I know. We'll use this CBD oil to sneak in some, blunts for teenagers. What? I mean, what's the logic there? He continued in his veto statement to say, this bill has the potential to exacerbate health problems of the critically ill and decrease public safety. Decrease public safety if you gave CBD oil to little kids. Now, that same year that Butch Otter vetoed the CBD oil bill, he signed a bill that allows any adult to carry a loaded gun, concealed carry, with no permit, with no training, anywhere but a church or a school. Any adult, walk into a gun shop, buy a gun, load it up, put it in their coat, hidden, walk in anywhere they want. Now, I don't want to get into a debate whether that's right or wrong. You can make your decision on the gun thing. That's your call. All I'm saying is don't tell me health and safety is why you're banning CBD oil for epileptic kids, and then health and safety doesn't seem to be a concern when it comes to any old Tom, Dick, and Harry running around with a loaded gun in their pants. That's how much the Idaho legislature hates marijuana, and the governor. The whole executive office of the state is in the thrall of the drug rehab industry and the law enforcement industry there. So we move on past 2015. When 2019 comes around, I got involved with the medical marijuana campaign for Idaho, the Idaho Medical Marijuana Act. And as we were getting ready to do our campaign, as we were getting ready to do fundraising and get some polling going, they decided they would change the rules. They were afraid that, oh my God, these guys will get the signatures, put it on the ballot, it'll win. They decided to change the rules. Now, the rules in Idaho are already pretty strict. Probably the second or third toughest state to get something on the ballot. Mississippi might be the toughest. And the reason why is because, first of all, you got to get 6% of the registered voters from the last election to sign your petition, right? So at the time, that worked out to about 55,000 voters. This time around, it's about 65,000 voters. Well, that's typical of most states. There's a number of votes you got to get. It's equal to a percentage of something, usually registered voters. So that's typical. But what's not typical is that Idaho also has a geographic requirement. Idaho has 35 legislative districts from which they pick their state senators and representatives. 35 districts. Each district's around, I forget the exact number of people in a district. But in Idaho, not only do you have to get 6% of the statewide total, that total must include 6% at least from at least 18 of the 35 districts. That is, your 6% has to come from at least half the state. In other words, if I go to one of the urban districts in Boise and I collect 100,000 signatures, it won't matter. Even though I need 55, 65,000, it won't matter because I got all 100,000 in one district. I got to go 6% in that district and 6% in that district until I collect 18 districts. And so to collect all those signatures from all those districts, the law gives you 18 months to do it. That was the rules when we got involved in 2019. In 2019, they tried to change the Constitution. They wanted to pass another amendment that said, well, I don't know if it was an amendment, it may have been statute, but they wanted to pass another law that reduced the signature gathering time from 18 months to 6 months, increase the threshold of signatures gathered statewide and by district from 6% to 10%, and increase the number of districts from 18 to 32. 32 of 35 districts, right? Now, luckily, this got shot down, didn't make it through the legislature because a lot of conservative groups in the state that have their eye on passing, tax initiative or a hunting initiative or a gun initiative or whatever, abortion initiative, they realized they wouldn't be able to get their stuff on the ballot either if that passed. So here we are. Here we are after the legislature declaring marijuana shall never, ever be legal. 2 years later, the governor vetoing their one try to get marijuana legal. 4 years after that, the legislature willing to almost completely gut the entire petitioning process out of the Constitution, or functionally put it out of everyone's reach. And now 2 years after that, you got a state senator proposing to ban any new drug laws, legalizing any drug that isn't already legal. If it's illegal now, it shall be illegal forever. That's how terrified they are that we're going to collect the money, put together a legalization initiative, place it on the ballot, and pass it. Because they can see the writing on the wall. They see Montana passing legalization by 57%. Montana is not that different from Idaho. It's less religious than Idaho, I'd say. But a lot of that same libertarian streak, a lot of that same leave me alone, get the government off my back kind of voter out there. They're seeing how Utah has gone with medical marijuana and how the Mormon Church has pretty much allowed that to kind of proceed so long as people aren't actually smoking it. They see how South Dakota went from having absolute prohibition, just like Idaho has, and passing medical by 70% and legalization by 54%, all in one election. Red states are no longer safe, and they can tell. They know it. And that's why we're winning. You know, if we're talking about it, we're winning, right? When we come back, let's talk about Arizona sales and Maine mermaids. The Storyteller Kitty Time podcast is now replaying on Radical Russ Radio. Join host Lisa Kunze and the Normal Show Live alumni for weekly takes from Colorado's Rocky Mountain High. Visit the Radical Russ schedule page for download links, and don't forget to do your homework. And now, Puff Pass Ponder with Radical Russ. An ounce is 28.3495 grams, but legal marijuana stores sell you 28 grams and call it an ounce. Legalization is shorting your bag by over a third of a gram, dude. This has been Puff Pass Ponder with Radical Russ. Hi, I'm Radical Russ Belville, the sole producer of this 24-hour marijuana music and cannabis conversation stream I call Radical Russ Radio. As part of my mission to educate and entertain people about the need to end adult marijuana prohibition, I produce the Russ Belville Show podcast every week, available absolutely free wherever you get your podcasts. For those of you who'd like to help support my mission financially, you can become a Radical Russ Radio VIP at patreon.com/radicalruss or by clicking the link for Toker Talk Radio in the main menu. For just $4.20 a month, VIPs will receive the exclusive download of Hour 2 of my podcast, Toker Talk Radio, every week, as well as the 5-minute cannabis headline news every weekday. Upgrade to the $14.20 a month tier, and you'll get those podcasts and a set of custom patriotic pro-marijuana stickers from me every quarter. And if you can afford to support Radical Russ Radio at $44.20 a month, you get my podcast, and each quarter you receive a poster, then a mug, then a t-shirt, and finally a hoodie that proclaim your support for ending adult marijuana prohibition. I literally cannot do this without you. Your support enables me to continue my life's work, and I thank you for it. Visit patreon.com/radicalruss and become a Radical Russ Radio VIP today. Welcome back, everybody. Got about a quarter of an hour left here in the first hour podcast, and reminding you to stay tuned live on Radical Russ Radio at radicalruss.com or rad-r.us/radio, where you can listen live on my Shoutcast feed. We're still going to get an app one of these days. It's not at the very, very top of my list of things to do yet. Got a lot of stuff trying to get this initiative on the ballot, so please bear with me while I try to legalize America's last absolute prohibition state. My timelines may have to be adjusted. And speaking about America's last absolute prohibition state, the rant I left off talking about C. Scott Grove's proposed amendment to the Idaho Constitution to forever ban the legalization of any drug that's not already legal as of 2020. And it has to also be FDA approved, right? So Idaho's would basically cede its authority as a state to regulate psychoactive drugs to the FDA. So much for states' rights, huh? But I wanted to give a little more detail on this because this is another example of some of the asymmetric warfare we have to fight through as marijuana reformers. It's always bad enough that, the government's been against us. They've got an unlimited supply of lawyers and an unlimited supply of money and the force of the government and the cops and everything. And all we've got is facts, science, reason, logic, compassion, and the truth. But we're winning because those things are more powerful, and they're having to increasingly cheat in order to try to beat us. Already, Scott Grove just wants to make an amendment that, hey, we can't beat you, so we're just going to make you illegal forever. But that's not the first time we've had to deal with any of these shenanigans, right? First of all, this Idaho situation is really maddening because of that quirk of the Idaho Constitution that allows citizens and legislators to propose laws, but only legislators can propose constitutional amendments. And as we all know from Schoolhouse Rock, constitutional amendments are the supreme law of the land in your state or federally. So laws are outranked by constitutions. There's the rub. As we move forward, citizens of the state of Idaho proposing a medical marijuana law and a recreational marijuana law, we've also got a state legislator proposing a constitutional amendment that is counter to those two laws. You follow what I'm getting here? Basically, what I'm telling you is, come 2022, on the Idaho ballot, there could very well be a medical marijuana initiative, there could be a recreational marijuana initiative, and there could be a prohibition constitutional amendment, all on the ballot at the same time. And let's just forecast or guess that the medical marijuana one gets 75%, and the legalization one gets 55%, and the constitutional amendment one gets 50.01% of the vote. You know what happens in that situation? Prohibition wins. Their amendment doesn't have to come in first. It just has to beat 50%. It wouldn't matter if ours passed with 99% of the vote. They would just be laws. And those laws would be outranked by the newly passed constitutional amendment. Those laws would be unconstitutional. So bad enough he wants to ban us from ever passing this in the future, he also has a good chance to stop us in the present if they're all on the same ballot. Now, I do have to admit this has been a boon for our fundraising efforts. I'll tell you, now talk about fear of missing out. You don't legalize marijuana in Idaho in 2022, it might be your last chance. Amazing, huh? But this is typical. They can't beat us at the ballot box. So they're increasingly trying the courts. You've seen in South Dakota, there's a trooper who's suing to overturn legalization there because supposedly it violates a single subject rule. The idea being, when you put an initiative, you can't say it's like the help the puppies and feed the poor, right? Like puppies is one thing, the poor are another thing. You can't do two different things. It has to be a single subject, right? So here's an initiative that legalizes industrial hemp and consumer cannabis, and they're saying, oh, well, that's two different things. Well, no, that would be like, we're going to help the Labrador puppies and we're going to help the Dachshund puppies. They're all puppies. It's all cannabis. It's a single subject. But it's one of these stupid lawsuits because they can't beat us at the ballot box. They're going to try to take it away through the courts. We got a similar one going on in Mississippi. Now, the Mississippi one's even crazier. The Mississippi lawsuit is in their petitioning laws. It says that you can get no more than 20% of your votes, 20% of your signatures, no more than 20% of your signatures from any one of the 5 congressional districts. Kind of like the Idaho thing, right? I was telling you, Mississippi's kind of hard because it's got another one of these geographic requirements. You can't just sit in Biloxi, Mississippi and collect all your signatures. You got to go to every one of the districts and get at least 20% from each one of the 5 districts. The problem now? There's only 4 districts. States adjust their populations, right? And in every census, they change the districts. And sometimes you lose a representative if you've lost population. And that's what happened in Mississippi. They went from 5 districts to 4 districts. Well, if the law says you can't collect more than 20% from your district, and there's only 4 districts, that means you can only collect 80% of the signatures you need. That means petitions are impossible in Mississippi, even though they just did one and it passed overwhelmingly. That's the thrust of that lawsuit. They're using a technicality, basically an error in drafting that locked them into 5 districts when now they only have 4 to be able to discount the votes of over 2/3 of the voters in Mississippi that approved medical marijuana. That's the kind of cheating that's going on here when they can't beat us at the ballot box. All sorts of lawsuits going on. And the other thing that happens is when they try to, monkey with the ballot box itself. Let's go back to Mississippi again, right? As already, they're trying to sue to try to invalidate this law. Let me tell you how tough it was to pass this law in the first place. So first they got to collect the signatures. In Mississippi, it's 10% of the signatures. And you got to get them from all the districts, right? Got that geographic requirement, but they did it. They collected like 200,000, some big number of signatures. They turn it in. And then once they turn it in to the Secretary of State and the legislature has 3 options that they could respond with. Number 1, they could say, oh my God, look at all these people that signed this petition. They must really want this law. Let's just make it a law. And boom, it'd be a law. Now, they didn't do that. Well, their second option was to say, oh my God, look at this medical marijuana. It's awful. We hate it. It's terrible. We're not going to make this a law, but you guys go ahead and vote on it. If you vote on it, make it a law, then it's a law. Well, they didn't choose that option either. They chose their third option. The third option under Mississippi law was that you could put their measure on the ballot and put your own measure on the ballot, a competing measure. So that was the first way they tried to screw medical marijuana in Mississippi, is alongside 65, which was their initiative number, which was a pretty decent medical marijuana, standard stuff, plants and patients and qualifying conditions with pain and all that, right? Typical medical marijuana. And the legislature got to put 65A on the ballot, which was terrible medical marijuana. Like only terminally ill patients could have it. You can't smoke it, and you can only use it on odd-numbered Tuesdays with a full moon. I mean, it was terrible medical marijuana. So right there's a possibility for a trap to stop the medical marijuana you don't want. Give them two choices. Maybe you can split the vote. But that wasn't enough shenanigans. They added another layer of shenanigans in Mississippi. They made it so that first there was a gateway question. The gateway question was, should there be medical marijuana at all? And then question number 2 was, all right, if you said there should be medical marijuana, or actually, let me rephrase that. Question number 2 is, which type of medical marijuana should there be? The good one or the bad one? Now, here's the trick. If you were a yes voter, if you said yes on the first question, there should be medical marijuana, you also had to go and on question 2, choose should it be good or bad. If you forgot the second question, if you forgot to choose good or bad, or if you messed up and chose them both because you didn't care which, your vote was disqualified. Not just the second vote, but also the first vote that said, yes, you should have some medical marijuana. So to pass medical marijuana in Mississippi, they had to vote twice. They had to vote yes on the first thing and yes for the good one, or pick the good one, right? 2 choices that had to come through to get medical marijuana. On the other side, if you didn't want medical marijuana in Mississippi, on that first question, you vote no. Should there be medical marijuana? No. Then you did not have to pick the second question. Now you could. You could say, well, if it does pass, I want this shitty medical marijuana to pass. But you didn't have to. Not like the yes voters. Yes voters, if they didn't get the second question, their yes vote is in the trash. But no voters, they could skip the second question and their no vote still counts. That's the level of shenanigans we're talking about at the legislative level from some of these people. And yet, medical marijuana passed with flying colors in Mississippi. Over 68% support on both of them. It was like over 2/3. But they're not the only ones. How about Montana? In Montana, they had to vote. Now, this wasn't shenanigans so much. It was just a kind of a technicality in their constitution. They had to vote yes on allowing a 21 marijuana age, because in the Montana Constitution, you're an adult at 18. So you have to have an exception if you want to make it 21 and over. So they had to pass an 18 age, and they had to pass legalization. And both of those passed with over 57% support. And then you got South Dakota, which put 2 things on the ballot, put medical marijuana on the ballot and put legalization on the ballot. Medical passes with 70%. Legalization passes with 54%. So these Idaho legislators are looking now at 3 red states. I mean, Mississippi doesn't get much redder. South Dakota's a pretty red state. Montana's mostly red. 3 red states that had 2 votes to have to get to medical or recreational marijuana, and they both passed. They threw every obstacle they could, and they both passed. That's why C. Scott Grow is so desperate. That's why they are willing to blow up the Idaho Constitution. They are willing to enshrine a ban, a prohibition, not unlike the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that banned alcohol, and we saw how well that turned out. They want to enshrine a constitutional prohibition against marijuana, ibogaine, LSD, magic mushrooms, a whole list of substances that are in those Idaho codes, psychoactive substances that are currently banned, that who knows what our medical understanding. 10 years ago, people weren't talking like they're talking now about psilocybin therapy. There's some of us on the fringe that knew about this stuff, but it wasn't a mainstream idea. MDMA, ecstasy, something that actually began from a clinical therapeutic setting in Dallas in the mid-'80s. Medical understanding changes, science changes, culture changes. Not Idaho. Oh, no. We're going to keep Idaho firmly ensconced in 1952. Actually, 1947, probably, after World War II, but before baseball's color barrier was broken. That little sweet spot, 1946, probably is where Idaho is stuck. Anyway, that's all I got for Hour 1. Stay tuned, Hour 2 is next. And sorry, YouTube folks, I don't know why the stream is down, but it is. For everyone here in the Gem State and beyond, coming to you from America's absolute last prohibition state, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
You plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.